listeners, it's Jana. Welcome back to Grief Out Loud. When someone dies, adults often worry about saying the wrong thing to children and teens. We wonder how much they understand, how honest we should be, and whether talking about death will somehow make things harder. My guest today believes that children are capable of far more than we usually give them credit for, and that what helps most isn't having all the answers, but being willing to stay present, answer their questions honestly, and make space for grief to be part of everyday life. Jessica Correnti is a certified child life specialist, founder of Kids Grief Support, and the author of the ABCs of Grief children's book series. After spending 14 years supporting children and families in pediatric hospitals, Jessica now specializes in helping children, teens, and their families navigate grief and loss. In our conversation, Jessica shares her professional knowledge, but also her personal experience with grief. After several miscarriages, Jessica and her family faced another heartbreak, the stillbirth of their daughter, Maggie. We talk about helping children understand death, how Jessica supports her two children in grieving for Maggie, and why resilience isn't something children simply have, and how grief can become woven into family life through countless small conversations over time. Okay, here's my conversation with Jessica Correnti. Jessica, welcome to Grief Out Loud.
Thanks for having me.
I'm looking forward to our time together. And for listeners who aren't familiar, including myself, with child life specialists, how do you describe the work to people? And is it similar, different to like a therapist or a counselor?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's funny that you ask that because as a certified child life specialist, when we are starting in our career, we're basically taught to come up with an elevator pitch because so many people are unfamiliar with what child life specialists are. So my definition of it essentially changes from setting to setting because it does look very different depending on where you are practicing, what type of unit in the hospital, or maybe you're in the community setting. But I can also give a one-sentence introduction to what child life is. And really, a certified child life specialist is an allied healthcare professional who is working to support children and families coping with any sort of stressful life event. So it could be an illness, it could be an injury, it could be a trauma or a death. What a child life specialist is actually doing is going to vary greatly depending on where they are practicing, but our role is really to help a child understand what is happening, to give them an opportunity to understand their feelings, express their feelings, and cope with whatever difficult thing they are going through.
And did you start your career in the more traditional hospital setting and then have transitioned into a different place of practicing?
I did, yeah. I spent the first 14 years of my career in the hospital setting, and the first 5 of those 14 years were in pediatric intensive care units. So, of course, with that, I had a lot of different types of grief scenarios coming into play, both death and non-death. I think, in general, just going into the hospital, unless it's a planned procedure, you're facing grief in some capacity. I've been in lots of different areas within the hospital. I spent a good bit of time in the pre-op, post-op surgical area of the hospital, in inpatient areas, in the emergency department. So I floated around to a lot of different areas in the hospital. After those first 14 years of my career, then I started changing my path and decided to open up a private practice and reach children and families outside of the hospital walls because I realized there are so many needs outside of the hospital walls and very limited child life resources outside of those walls. So I wanted to bridge that gap.
Is there a theme of people who are reaching out to you in your private practice in terms of, I know when you're in the hospital, it's like the wide range of non-death to death losses. And just wondering if you have like a certain genre of folks who tend to be reaching out to you now.
Yeah. So with my private practice, I almost entirely specialize on grief. And it's become that way because of so many personal and professional experiences that I have been through. But my private practice, it's called Kids Grief Support. So almost entirely it is children, teens, and families coming to me with some sort of death of a loved one. But I also really make it clear that it's not just death losses that people can come into my doors with. So sometimes I have people that are coping with, maybe they're going through a move and it's a really difficult experience for their child and they need some help to, help their child process that. Or maybe there is a medical diagnosis that is really changing or impacting the life of either the child or really as a family unit. So there are some non-death losses that come into my doors, but it's primarily somebody who has gone through a significant death-related loss that is seeing me in my private practice.
Going back to the beginning of your career and wondering, at that point when you started this work, what did you know or think you knew to be true about grief?
Yeah. So since I started in the ICU, I was seeing grief quite a bit, and at that point, I knew that everybody grieved differently, everybody coped differently. I knew that you can't really fix grief. You can't fix grief, not really. You can't fix grief, but you can sit with it and you can be a companion with grief. But I knew a lot of things on the surface. I think as time went on, and I went through my own personal grief experiences, I think my understanding changed just a bit with the depth of grief. I think the big difference in going through my own grief experiences is just how truly profound, and I think what I really didn't understand is how it affects every single aspect of your whole life. It impacts your relationships with your friends, your family, yourself. It affects your personal life, your professional life, cognitively, financially. Every single aspect of your life is changed when you go through grief. And I don't think I really realized that as a new practitioner when I first started in the hospital setting. I think I thought that, yes, it's super hard at first and you build these skills and these tools and you get through it and it's a little bit lighter over time. I think I had a little bit more of a linear idea of what grief looked like. And having been through it myself with profound grief, I realized that it's always there. It just changes shape and form, and it's more of a roller coaster ride than it is this linear process.
I'm picturing you graduating and going into your first job, being handed this coloring book about grief. And then over time, from your personal experiences and professional experiences, coloring in the images in that coloring book to just bring more depth. And it's weird to use the word vibrancy, but to really illustrate what grief can look like and feel like for people.
That brought in such a beautiful illustration in my mind too, because I think so many of us have this perception that grief and death is just all this dark, hard, heaviness, and there is so much color and so much life and joy sometimes too, and these beautiful connections that come out of grief and end-of-life situations. And I think back to some of the families that I sat with in the hardest moments of their life, and there are these deeply beautiful things that happen in those rooms. And so that's something I really carry with me too. It's not only dark, sad, super depressing things. So many people, when they hear that I do this work, they're like, how do you do that? I mean, I think we all get that in the grief space. And we realize over time that there are so many bright lights in this space.
I know we were going to talk about your personal grief experiences later in the interview, but I think we got to start there too. So I wonder if you do want to share about maybe what you knew personally about grief going into this work and then what has unfolded since.
I feel like going into this work, I had pretty, I don't know, I don't like to use the word typical, but yeah, pretty typical experiences as a young child with grief, going through the death of a great grandparent, going through pet loss. So some of those very typical early grief situations that one might have as a school ager or a teenager. I do remember one of my first grief memories was when a great grandparent died when I was in middle school. And I remember going to the funeral and telling one of my teachers that I needed to leave school early. And their natural process of questioning was, who's the funeral for? How old were they? I said, my great grandmother. She was in her 90s. And I heard, at least she lived a long life. And I remember as a teenager feeling so gutted to hear that, at least in my mind. I was like, but I only got, I don't know what I was, 12, 13 years with her. And it didn't feel like at least to me. Yes, somebody can live a long, healthy life and that still hurts. So I remember even then, way before I ever had this professional lens on any of this, feeling really gutted by that type of reaction. Fast forward to my own adult grief experiences. I went through several different pregnancy losses. I went through 6 different pregnancy losses, and a lot of people hear me, if they know who I am, if they follow me on social media, they know that I mostly talk about my daughter Maggie, who was stillborn. And I like to say she's like my unofficial spokesperson for all of the babies that died. But I have been through several losses before her and a couple after her as well. But the experience of going through the ultrasound where I found out that she didn't have a heartbeat anymore, going through labor, having the experience of having 9 beautiful hours with her after I delivered her, that experience was and is my big grief experience that sits with me every day. And every day looks different, but that is the one grief experience that changed everything for me.
I'm thinking in my mind of going in for that ultrasound and how, I don't know if this was true for you, but I know for me, like going in for medical tests and how a minute feels like an hour, and it feels like I haven't taken a breath in an hour. And I wonder what you recall about that.
Yeah. It's weird going back to that place because I think my brain has erased so much of that time, perhaps in a protective measure. But I do remember that feeling of the room got so quiet and times sat still. And I remember the whispers in the room from the doctor, and I just had like this feeling in my gut that something was really wrong, because that wasn't normal to feel this way and to see this transpire. And it's hard to actually talk about it because I feel it in my body, but I almost don't even have the words to really put it all together. It's more of a feeling than something that I can really talk about in a way. So sometimes I wonder about that too, just what people are carrying with them that they're never really saying out loud because maybe they don't even have the words.
And it seems so spot on then that a lot of your work is around finding words for kids in their grief, with your book series of the ABCs of grief. And it's so accurate of how hard it can be to find the words to describe what lives in our bodies. And this is kind of maybe, I don't know, a strange question, but if you were to think of a color for that experience, does that feel accessible?
Yeah. I mean, when I think of that room when everything changed, it just feels black and gray in there. I mean, it feels like a hole, and I felt like a shell of myself, and everything felt distorted and was very surreal in the worst of ways.
One of the terms that people use a lot when talking about pregnancy loss, stillbirth, is this idea of like disenfranchised grief, which I'm so anti-terminology, but I appreciate the word of like, it's often, for me, means like grief that other people don't recognize or grief that we don't have a lot of language models to explain to other people. What was your experience with that in terms of sharing with other people or receiving support from folks?
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like it's a little bit different with so my other losses were miscarriages in the first trimester. Maggie died at 22 weeks. So I feel like they were treated very differently from the outside world. And I feel like with the miscarriages, I got this sense from other people of these things happen, and almost like brushing it off, like it was just one bad day and everything will be fine. Even from doctors, I got these doctors saying, you're young, you can get pregnant again. I'm like, but that's not the point. I've been pregnant many times. Clearly that's not the problem. It's having a baby arrive here healthy and well. And so even from people that quote unquote should have known better, I had that brushing it aside. And then I still had that a bit with Maggie too at 22 weeks. I feel like since the world didn't get to meet her, there was this, I think initially there was a lot of comfort and support in others, but after a couple of months, I feel like people forgot, and in their mind, they never saw her living in this world. So it was almost like out of sight, out of mind, and there's no memories to share. It's not like an older child or an adult where they can share, I remember when we did this together, or so there's all of those missed opportunities too. People sometimes, I think, just they don't even know how to connect or what to say or what to do to be a support to somebody who has gone through this type of loss. So I feel like anybody who's been through this type of loss could probably write a whole book of like all the really insensitive, awful things that people have said, well-meaning, but just didn't know what to say. I mean, things like, at least you have another child at home, and like, that doesn't help. I think it's all those at least type of statements that do continue to make people feel isolated in this, and their grief does feel invisible and just not validated because of all of those type of statements.
I always picture those at least statements just closing the door on a conversation, because what do you say after that? And I wonder if people, and perhaps some folks have since then, said things or responded in ways that left the door open for you. What would you have most wanted to share with them about Maggie or about your experience?
I did have a few people that really sat with me in my grief. I remember there were a couple of friends that came over and literally sat with me and asked, do you want to tell me about her? Do you want to share pictures? Like, I'm here for whatever you need, whether that is, watching something on TV that has nothing. We can just sit here, not talk to each other and do something else. Or if you want to share what things were like for you guys, what did you do in the hospital? What pictures do you have? And I did share those things with the people that I felt were receiving and were going to be sensitive in what they would say back to me. So I did have a couple of people that I was able to really share all of it with. And I think about that often. I mean, there are not many people who really got to know Maggie in that way. And that meant so much to be able to share her and show that she existed, because I think that's the thing. So many people who have gone through these types of losses, it can feel like they don't exist to the rest of society, and having them acknowledge that they did exist, and being able to share their name and their story and their picture and all of those things mean a lot to bereaved parents.
I was just thinking about how hard that is for parents in some ways, no matter how old their child is when their child dies. But oftentimes there are people in their life who, like you mentioned, met their child, spent time with their child, had memories of them, and how unique it is when it is a child who was stillborn or other people didn't have a relationship with them, to have that opportunity. Just like, let me tell you my story of them. Let me help you know them in some way.
And there are so many pieces of grief with the what if, with the future, that is very specific to this type of loss. Of course, any type of child loss, but specifically if you have a pregnancy or infant loss, you really never got to know their personality. So there are so many unfilled blanks with just that wonder that comes with, who would they have been? What would they have looked like? How would they have interacted with their siblings? There are so many questions. And I get them from my own children that are, my living children. They ask these questions all the time. And sometimes their questions are things that I'm thinking of as well. And sometimes they're not. Just today, actually, my 8-year-old asked me, do you think that Maggie is still a baby wherever she is, or is she the age that she would be here on Earth? And it's like these little things that carry with you as a person and as a family, too, over your lifetime.
How did you respond?
So there are definitely some questions we have no answers to. And I said, that's really interesting. I wonder that sometimes too. And I left it there for a bit, and I tried to see where she was going to take it. She moved on to a different topic pretty much right away, as kids do. But, it makes you pause and think. And I think sometimes we can get so caught up in I need to have an answer for everything, and I need to have this big dialogue and speech. And kids move so quickly from one thing to the next. They just want that answer to one little thing, and we might not have the answer, and that's okay.
Yeah, to just say, that's interesting. I wonder about that too. It's like all that she may have needed in that moment to keep the door open, right?
Yeah.
To not shut the door on her for that kind of questioning. Speaking of your children, how did you talk with your son who was, I think he was 19 months when Maggie died? How did you talk with him about that?
Yeah. So for him, he went to pretty much every single ultrasound appointment that I had. He was very integrated into all of my prenatal care. At home, he would lift up my shirt to talk to my belly, tell his sister all about, the different things that he saw on his walk. And so he already had a very special relationship with his sister while I was pregnant. When we went to the hospital, I knew that I was going to be delivering her stillborn, I immediately had these ideas and plans for what I wanted that to look like. And I think this is my professional lens coming into the mix of this, because I have supported so many families through the death of a child. I knew what was possible and what I might regret if I didn't do specific things that aligned with what I wanted for my family. So, and one of those things was I knew that I wanted my son to meet her. And Maggie was born a little bit after 3:30 a.m., but my son was in the care of my mom at the time. I called her right away and said, as soon as you guys can get here, I'd like you guys to come. I want him to meet his sister. I knew that this opportunity was fleeting, and I knew that even if he didn't remember meeting her, we could take pictures so he could remember via the pictures. So that was really important to me. But having him meet her, I think, gave it that concrete visual that he needed to realize, okay, Mom doesn't have a baby in her belly anymore. The baby is right here in her arms. This baby, her eyes aren't open. She's not breathing. She's not moving. And I was able to just very clearly say, Maggie died. She's not breathing. She won't be coming home with us. And it's interesting because by the book, most people would say at 19 months, there's no way a child can understand the permanence of death. But he got it. He got it right away. And I think the reason that he understood it was because he had all of these concrete pieces in place so that he could see it with his eyes. He had the opportunity to hold her if he wanted to. And I was using very concrete language with him that had no other meaning. And this also wasn't the first time that he had heard these words before. I mean, we talked about death very matter-of-factly just in nature and what he saw in his world around him. So, again, that's a bit of my professional background coming out, but I think that played such a deep role in why he understood it right away. So, and, it would have been totally normal if he didn't get it right away, too. Not to say that every child of that age will 100% get it either. But I think sometimes we put kids in these little boxes of a child of this age will only understand it in this way, and a child of that age will get it this way. And sometimes it is totally the opposite of what we think. And the flip side sometimes, too. Sometimes in my practice, I've seen school-agers or teenagers that have misconceptions that don't necessarily line up with their age, and it might be younger. So I think we just need to look at everybody as an individual, and it's helpful to have those developmental frameworks to think through proactively, what might they know? How can we talk to them, and then assess from there?
I'm so glad you said that, because over the years, I've had to present the developmental responses to grief training 1,000 times. And I'm like, this is my least favorite thing to talk about.
Yeah.
I mean, I love talking about it, but also having to put kids into these specific concrete boxes that then people are going out in the world expecting certain things. And I'm like, don't be surprised when the youngest of the kids you're working with seem to get it in a way that the teenagers are like, I just can't believe this actually happened. I know what happened, but I can't believe it happened. And I think we miss an opportunity for the reality of the disbelief to be there for us, no matter how old we are, and for the youngest kids to be able to grasp things at times that we are surprised by.
Mm-hmm. And they have a very blunt way of saying it and showing it, too.
Yes, which I appreciate. I'm like, thank you. You could teach all of us something. For your son, did you prepare him in some way for what he would encounter when he did come to the hospital? So that wasn't the first time he was hearing some of those words.
Yeah. So I did prepare him in a way for what to expect, which is very child life of me, because that's one of our core principles and things that we do as we prepare our kids for these new experiences in a very sensory way. So with that, I prepared my son for what he was going to see in the hospital room with myself too, not only his sister, but you're going to see me. I'm going to be sitting in the hospital bed. I'm not going to be getting up and moving around a whole lot. I told him about my IV that I had in my hand. And then I shared some information of what his sister was going to look like with, her skin is going to look more like reddish pink because she was born so early, and her body is a little bit cold. It doesn't have, so all of these different sensory things make a huge difference for children when they're walking into these new situations, to be able to walk in with a little bit more comfort. And then they can just be there in it without their eyes darting around like, what's this? What's that? Is this normal? Is that normal? Are they, because kids can get very, they're curious and they can get very overwhelmed by new situations. So if we can prepare them for what to expect with walking in the door, then they can just be there. And of course, they'll probably ask some more questions, and we'll follow them as they come up.
Jessica, you're making me realize that we need adult life specialists. If I think about all the times I've like shown up at the hospital at 5 a.m. for like supporting someone through a surgery, and if someone had said to me ahead of time, like, hey, let's have a 15-minute phone call, I'm going to explain what everything looks like, smells like, sounds like, what it all means, it would have made my life much easier.
The amount of times that I think child life specialists have heard that same exact phrase, I mean, we would all be millionaires if we each got some money for every time we've heard that. But it's true. Like we all need information about what to expect, and it lessens our anxiety, and it just makes it easier to go through these experiences if we know what's going to be happening.
I was just sitting with the idea that there might be an assumption that watching your son meet Maggie and have his experience would compound the emotional experience for you and maybe for his other parent. But I'm wondering, was there anything about watching your son meet Maggie and be there with you that was helpful for you?
I think it was all more helpful than, oh, wait, maybe that's just a me thing with my personality, with my background, because I think in a way it helped give me a job. I know how to help kids through these difficult experiences. So I think, and I've never really thought about it in this way until you asked that question, but in a way, I think it really did help me feel like, okay, there's something that I can do here to help him. And that helps me knowing that he is taken care of with, explaining things in a way that he can understand, with given the choice. Do you want to hold her? Do you not want to hold her? Do you want to take pictures with her? So all of these things, I gave him choices. So I think because I did this in my professional world, it in a way took me out of the personal experience just for a moment to be able to meet his needs right then and there. Not to say that takes it away from me forever, because then when he walks out the door, then the weight of it does hit me. But I think in a way I put on my child life hat for a little bit, and in a way that was really healing and helpful for me to do. So I don't know if others will relate to that at all, but really thinking back to that, I think that's really how it was for me. It was really healing to be able to put on a different hat for a minute.
Yeah, to tap into that sense of competence that you have, and how so often in our own grief we feel incompetent. Like we're not sure how to do it on our own. We're not sure what's happening. We don't have much control over what's going on, but to have that opportunity to pull from things that you feel comfortable and confident in.
That reminds me, I actually I taught the labor and delivery nurses how to do 3D hand molds with, I did Maggie's hand and foot 3D molds, and the labor and delivery nurses had never done that before. So I was literally teaching them how to do it while doing it on, my own daughter's hands and feet. And again, I think it's like this almost an out of body experience of wearing that professional hat while doing this with my own daughter. And it was healing to do that in a way.
How about your other daughter? So she never got a chance to meet Maggie. She came onto this planet after Maggie was here. How do you talk with her about her sister?
Yeah, so I think there's this assumption that kids born afterwards have a very different grief experience, and it's maybe some people would assume, oh, they never met them. It's just not really a thing that they grieve, but watching her go through her own grief experience, I realized how similar her grief is to her brother's grief. And they cope with it in very different ways, but they both love her and miss her. And we never really had any, it's not like we had a sit down conversation and talk about, so when you were, before you were born, you had a sister and she died. It wasn't ever like that. Maggie has just been so integrated into our life and our family that it was these little micro conversations from the day that my living daughter was really old enough to take this information in, which like was before she was 1. She would look at pictures and point at them, and I'd say, "That's Maggie, that's your sister." And little by little, the questions would come from her, and it was a accumulation of all of these really probably like 2-sentence conversations over time. She's now 8 years old and talks about Maggie almost every day, and she will share her with anybody who will listen, her family, friends, classmates, even her teachers, complete strangers. It's been interesting, though, hearing from the teachers some of the things that have come up, and you can tell that the teachers have been, some of them, not all of them, some of them have been really uncomfortable with the grief conversations coming up at school, and they've asked me, who's this Maggie person that she's talking about? Like, that's her sister. She talks about her all the time. She is deeply connected to her and wants to kind of bring her along with her with everything that she does. Like my daughter will wear these little pearl earrings, and Maggie means pearl. So when she wears these earrings, she's like, "Oh, I'm wearing my Maggie earrings." And so it brings Maggie into these conversations, and you can tell it means a lot to her to be able to do that. But I know that not everybody is comfortable, especially I think almost more so the older generations are not as comfortable with this. Most of her friends have been very open to it, and they will bring Maggie along for the ride too. One of her best friends the other day painted her nails pink and blue and said, "Oh, I'm wearing Maggie colors. Maya told me that those were her colors." And it's really beautiful to watch how she integrates her sister into her everyday, and it's not a big deal. It, like some people make it out to be. It just is.
Yeah, there's no like gasp after for her, and that speaks so strongly to you and your family and how you've supported both of your kids and being able to talk about it in such a matter-of-fact, day-to-day way. Have there been times for your kids where they have had like bigger emotional responses to grieving for their sister?
Yeah. I mean, both of them have. I notice it's a little bit different for my son, who's now 11, compared to his sister. So with my son, as he's gotten older, he keeps a little bit more within. With my daughter, she's an open book with everything. And there have been some things that I've found really interesting with both of their reactions. But one thing that's really coming to my mind right now is my daughter has said over a couple different times things like, "Why don't people think I have a sister?" Or "Why don't people know about Maggie?" So these little phrases that have changed shape a little bit over the years, but all have kind of the same theme of, why aren't people talking about her, really? Or why don't people see me as having a sister? Like, people are saying that, I'm not telling the truth by talking about having a sister. So those have been pretty eye-opening to me, to just see how that kind of stuff shows up. And there have been times that are, really heavy tears of just missing her, and it comes and goes in waves for sure. Most of the time, both of my kids just talk about their sister in a very matter-of-fact way, but sometimes it is heavier. Sometimes they're missing her more, and all of the what-if wonders come into play, and that's when I think it gets heavier for both of them, is sitting in that place of like, what would things have been like if she was here?
Stepping a little bit more into your professional realm, knowing that you carry your personal into the professional, I'm curious what your reaction to and response is to these sentiments around, well, kids are resilient, so they'll get over it. Or the other side, which is what I hear, I think, more often is, does this mean my child is broken forever. Like their life is ruined moving forward now that someone in their life has died. And like, what's your response? Well, how do you react? And then how do you respond?
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that, like, kids are resilient. They'll be fine. I have like a visceral reaction to that statement. And kids can be resilient, but it's not by itself. So like that last, oh, they'll be fine. So if it's said in they'll be fine, we can just let them do their thing, let them be. That's where the problem is in my mind, because kids need support to be resilient. So it doesn't just magically happen. They need somebody to help them process what has happened. They need to be validated in their experiences and somebody to really lead them into figuring out, well, how can we move forward with this and develop some coping skills so that the next time that we face something difficult, you have those skills built to be able to get through tough things. Because life is tough. Just because you had one grief experience doesn't mean that, like, check, you're done and you're good to go. Wouldn't that be nice?
I wish.
Yeah. So kids will go through other difficult life experiences, and if they have that foundation set, then it can make it easier in the future. It's not a guarantee, but it can if they have that support there and those skills built. And I think that goes into that second piece of, like, people thinking, oh, they just went through this profound grief situation, they're going to be broken forever. I wouldn't agree with that either. I think it's natural to have that fear as a parent or a caregiver. But what I've seen, when kids do have the support and the space to freely process their grief and all the messy feelings that come with it, those kids I've seen have been some of, like, the most empathetic, caring, multi-passionate people that are doing really amazing things in their life. So I think in some ways, for some kids, having great support, it can be something that, I don't want to, like, silver line it, but it can be something that is a growth opportunity too. I mean, there's all of this information about, like, post-traumatic growth, and I think that primarily is looking at people who are adults going through difficult situations, but kids can go through that too. They can grow from some of the most painful, difficult experiences from their life. But both sides of that, it doesn't happen all on its own. It's with support.
You've talked about, or you've mentioned, like, the coping strategies or the coping skills and how integral they are to the work that you do in supporting kids through big life transitions, primarily grief and loss. What are some of your, like, favorite go-to ones to help kids start to learn and practice?
Mm-hmm. So that's one of my books is the ABCs of Grief Coping. So there's a ton of different ways to cope with grief and other difficult experiences. But I think one of the things that I want to bring up here is, I think sometimes people have, like, this idea of these are the only things that are coping skills or coping strategies, and coping can look like really anything that helps us carry the weight of tough experiences. So it's going to be something that is highly individualized and unique to that person and also their grief experience too. But I think as caregivers, we do need to help show kids what is available. We need to model for them, this is what you can do, maybe bringing everybody together, whether it's a family unit, trying different activities and rituals together. But sometimes kids are really intuitive with what is going to be helpful for them. And sometimes they need some assistance with figuring out what's going to be supportive for them. So sometimes it is things like going outside and taking a walk together, or doing a meditation together, or writing or drawing to their person. Sometimes kids are not very expressive and emotive, and just playing sports or getting that big energy out is going to be what's most supportive for them. So I think it is a lot of like trying it on and seeing if it fits right now to see if this is something that is helpful for them. And something that I teach a lot of the kids that I work with is we're not really going to know what works for us until we give it a try. And what works for us right now might be very different from 6 months, a year down the road. Something else might really work for us then. So it's this ebb and flow. It's constantly changing. So we can have a lot of different things that we do to help support us. But I think the underlying piece here is that kids need a little bit of support to give them some options of what can be in their, well, maybe we'll call it a coping menu and what they want to try on that day.
And that's why your books are so delightful, because there's 26 options, probably more, in your book, the ABCs of coping. Going back to the personal for a moment, because I really am grateful you mentioned that piece of like the coping, what we do to navigate our grief changes over time. And then sometimes we have grief over how we're navigating grief is changing. And that's a whole other conversation. But what did you find was most helpful for you early on after Maggie died versus what are kind of your turn to strategies now for yourself?
So in the very beginning, right after we left the hospital, I used to, every night before bed, I would sit down with a journal and I would write letters to Maggie. And that was a really healing process for me. I probably did it almost every day for 4 or 5 months. And then one day I realized, I haven't sat down and written her a letter in a while. And I realized I had been essentially writing these letters to her in my head. I'm like, I don't think I really need that anymore. I don't think that there was a time where I felt like if I didn't sit down and do it, I was almost like not being a good parent in a way. I wasn't honoring my time with her. And then I let that guilt go and I realized, no, I'm still having these conversations, but I don't have to do it in the same way over time. I'm just having these other ways of connecting with her. And as time has moved on, I have had a lot of different ways that I'm processing my own grief. And I think my work really is one of the biggest ways that I connect with her. You mentioned my books, and my grief experiences are in the illustrations of those books. But within those illustrations, there are little nods to Maggie that nobody else knows but me, unless I tell them. But there are very specific things that connect me to her in the books, whether it is something written into the book or just kind of in the background in the illustrations. But everything that I do in my professional work is really by proxy a way that I'm parenting Maggie.
Well, I didn't think I could love your books anymore, but now there's a different level of emotionality in them now. So thank you for sharing that with me, and for any listener who's going to now go get your books if they don't already have them. And
I know that my illustrator too, she's gone through different grief situations too, and that she's talked about how her illustration process has been deeply healing for her as well, as she has gone through her own different types of grief situations. And I think that's such a beautiful thing about artwork is it does carry this emotion in it, and it does carry our stories as me as the writer and her as the illustrator. There is so much to each of these illustrations that, we could probably write a book on each one of the illustrations and how that came to be,
So we've alluded to your books and we've mentioned the name of one of them, but I wondered if you just wanted to share your collection, the titles of them, and then you're doing so much other work in the social media sphere and ways for people to just follow along with all of the helpful things that you're writing and sharing. So I wondered if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So the series is called The ABCs of Grief. The first book is The ABCs of Grief, which really follows the alphabet to unpack what grief actually is, to bring that understanding. The second book is The ABCs of Grief, Emotions and Feelings, going through 26 different feelings that are common for one to feel while grieving any type of loss, death, or non-death loss. And then, of course, there are more than 26. So the ones that didn't fit into the book, I have about 100 more grief feelings on the end pages of that book. And then I spoke of the ABCs of grief coping. And again, it follows the alphabet to show kids what they can do with all of these different messy grief feelings. And again, the extra words are on the end pages of that as well. And then I do have one other book that came before that series that is specifically for bereaved siblings called Forever Connected.
And then you are also very active Instagram. Where else can people find you?
Yeah. On Instagram, I'm at Kids Grief Support. And on my website, kidsgriefsupport.com is where people can find me. And with my private practice, I see kids in person in my local area, in the Baltimore area, but also virtually, really worldwide. So people can, if they need support, they can reach out and have that kind of support as well.
Great. And listeners, I'm going to list all of that in the show notes so you can easily connect with Jessica. And yeah, Jessica, first, thank you for everything that you do in this world to help all of us better understand how to show up and support kids, but also to support the adults in their life too, which, kids don't live in a vacuum. So yeah, I mean, the work you're doing is just making a huge difference in the realm of educating people and helping people feel their own sense of competence of how to be there for kids and families. So yeah, thank you for that. But most especially, thank you for sharing so much today with me about your own grief and about Maggie, and just feel, very thankful.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And listeners out there, I say this to you each and every time, but thank you for being part of our show and our community. You can help us out by giving us a rating or a review wherever you're listening. You can also email me at griefoutloud@dougy.org. That's also our main website, dougy.org. If you head there, you're going to find information about our local programming, all of our free downloadable resources, information about all of our training opportunities, and of course, each and every episode of Grief Out Loud. We're always so thankful to the Chester Stephan Endowment Fund for their support of the show. And Grief Out Loud is a production of Dougy Center, the National Grief Center for Children and Families in Portland, Oregon. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you'll join us again next time.